We just had our breakfast, so we always have breakfast in the morning when we wake up. And I get up earlier and do some writing, and then the one gets up and gets the food ready for the cats. And then we get breakfast going, and another day, you know. Uh, so as I'm getting older, you start thinking back to like things that have happened in your life, particularly your early childhood and those formative years, and it's not nostalgia at all. It's just interesting. Um, so I remembered a thing this morning earlier. I grew up in Hollywood, Florida, in the '50s when Hollywood was a very small town. It had a tremendous resort community around the beaches with big fancy hotels and everything, but the town was small. I think there were 35,000 people, and it was a lovely little beach town, and it had a newspaper, and the name of the newspaper was the Hollywood Sun Tatler. Tatler is like to tell on somebody, you know, like gossip. So that's great. The Hollywood Sun Tatler, and it kept that name until recently. It sold, and then they renamed it something normal. But when I was about 7, I went to work for the Hollywood Sun Tatler. So here, look. In fact, I had a cap, and a lot of the paper boys, they wore their cap like that. That's how they wore it. It really, you know. So my job was to show up in the alley behind the Sun Tatler and pick up a bundle of newspapers and go out on the street in downtown Hollywood. And downtown Hollywood is a small town, so downtown to a city boy, because I later became clearly a city boy, downtown is kind of a silly term for a little town like that. But my first day, you go to the back and you give them your identification, because they give you an identification, and they handle you a bundle, and the bundle is 25 newspapers. And you go out on the street and you sell them. And you're like, Hollywood Sun Tatler, right here, get the news, you know. And it was fun. I had so much fun doing that. But here's what happened. On my very first day, I pick up my bundle, and the paper was 5 cents. Each paper cost 5 cents. I went out on the street and I walked a block until I was in front of the Western Union. That's when there was such a thing as like, and also the printout of, like, you remember the Western with the little, with each sentence pasted on there, really stop, you know, whatever. And I'm standing there, and a lady walks out of the Western Union, and she walks up to me and she says, "Give me all your papers." And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "I want to buy all your papers." And I said, "Okay." And I sold them, and it was like a nickel each, so I got $1.25. Or I don't remember, I don't remember how much it was. I think it was a nickel, but my mind said maybe it was a quarter each, and then I would get a nickel. I think that's what it was. I'd get a commission for each paper sold. So when you sold your bundle, you were done for the day. You'd go back to the clerk in the window and report in and give him your proceeds, and he would check off and give you your commission. Well, I was back there in 10 minutes. And he said, "You know, what are you doing here?" I said, "I just sold all my news." He said, "How could you sold all your news?" I said, "I sold all my newspapers." He said, "God, you're amazing." I didn't tell him that it was one lady. So you know, there was suddenly this myth that circulated around the Sun Tatler of like, "Oh my God, did you hear?" Okay, so I had a jar at home where I built up all these nickels from selling papers. I never sold 25 papers in 10 minutes again. But here's the thing: the Hollywood Sun Tatler was a very small newspaper, and I don't think they had a proofreader. And my father was a rabbi, and in the Hollywood Sun Tatler, it would publish, and they'd say "Rabbit Lehrer" or "Rabid Lehrer." And this would make my dad furious. And I would be sitting at the breakfast table, and he'd be reading the Hollywood Sun Tatler, and he'd say, Marguerite, again, Rabbit Lehrer. Ach! Or, Rabbit, Marguerite, how can they call me Rabbit Lehrer? So one morning, I said, Dad, and he sat at the head of the table, and so I leaned over and I said, Dad, can I ask you a question? He said, of course, my son is going to ask me a question. I said, do you think in the history of Judaism, of rabbinical Judaism, that a rabid rabbit bit a rabbi and the rabbi got rabies? And he gave me that look, and he looked at my mother, and he said, Marguerite, there's something wrong with your son. Okay.